Hi all, this is Lalit here. Thanks for Gaurav and all the participants. Thanks for your patience for the last time. Davide is here again to do the introduction webinar for TypeScript and React. So I will, without much further ado, I will hand it over to Davide. Thanks.
Hi everybody, this is David Guida. I hope that everybody can see my screen at the moment. Today we are going to do a small and quick introduction about React and TypeScript. This is the summary, the agenda for today. So we're going to discuss about what's React and why we might want to work with that. And then I'm going to show how to set up your dev environment. Then we're going to talk about the components, the properties and states, what are those definitions. I'm going to discuss just a little bit about Webpack, and then I'm going to show you a small demo about a very, very, very simple, like hello world-like application in React. So my name is David Guida. You can find my personal blog at www.davidguida.com. I was a Dell Sr software engineer, but now I'm a CTO at a personal company. It's studio3pl.com. Okay, so let's discuss a little bit about React. React is a library developed by Facebook. And it's not a framework like, for example, AngularJS. I'll show you what's the actual difference between a library and a framework later. React uses virtual DOM representation with a patching mechanism that basically updates only the dirty portions of the screen, which lets us to achieve the impressive performances even with large datasets. The main idea behind React is to use stateless components with parameter passed via JS6 attributes, which is something very, very, very similar to construction injection, but in our case would be like property injection. And we're going to talk a little bit about JS6 later. Well, why we should use React and not Angular? First of all, React, at least to me, had a faster learning curve. For example, Angular has things like directives, linking, compiling, a very, very complex life cycle. React instead is definitely much simpler. Also, as I told you before, it's a library, not a framework, which means that it's smaller and allows you to include only the feature that you really need. For example, with Angular, you have to ship your application with all the modules. Maybe you don't want to use the routing mechanism of Angular. Well, with React, you don't have this issue. So you are going to include only and only the features that you need. And that basically means that your application is going to be much smaller, leaving you with a smaller footprint. Also, well, JS6 is great. JS6 is basically an HTML-like syntax that allows you to specify a DOM representation of your components, and everything is embedded directly in JavaScript code. Basically, that means that you're going to have things like Intellisense, which is always a good thing to have. Okay, so in order to set up your development environment, there are a couple of steps that you have to do, which are basically fairly easy. So first of all, you have to make sure that you have installed globally Typescript, for example, and typings and Webpack. We're going to discuss about the Webpack later. Then you have to put yourself inside the directory where you want to build your project and type npm init. The Node Package Manager will ask you about a couple of questions about your project, like the project name, if you have a repository, what's your name, the license you want to use. Then when you're done and happy with that, we can move forward and try to install some dependencies. In our case, we want to install React, React DOM, and have them saved inside the Node modules folder. And then we need also some dev dependencies. Dev dependencies, for those of you that know that, basically are those dependencies that we are going to use only while writing our application, but are not used by the actual application. So in our case, and in the demo that we are going to that I'm going to show you later, we are going to use something called light server, which allows us to fire up a small web server just to show the app. Then, of course, we need to create source maps, which, well, are pretty much useful when trying to debug. And, of course, we need a TypeScript linter for us. So we need the TS loader. Also, we need to install the type definitions for React because we're going to work with TypeScript, so we need the definitions from JavaScript to TypeScript. So yeah, that's the typing install, and yeah, global, the DT React and DT React DOM. Then, and that's the last step, I promise, we need to link TypeScript, I mean the global installation TypeScript, to the one that we have installed locally in our projects. Okay, so when create a TypeScript project, the first thing that you have to do, at least one of the first things that you need to do, is create a tsconfig file, which basically tells the system a couple of details about our TypeScript project. In our case, for example, we're going to use as an output here the dist folder. We want source maps, we want experimental decorators, and for example, we're going to use common.js as a module loader. And yeah, why not? We're not going to target ES6, okay, for compiling. The GS6 thing that you can find at the bottom is basically, well, the TypeScript ships with 6 modes. The first one is preserve, and the second one is react. Basically, it just affects the emit stage. If we use preserve, that means that basically we want to use the .gs6 files for a later transform step. In our case, we don't want to do that because we're going to write TypeScript code in .ts format. So we don't need to go through any other kind of JS6 transformation, and we want to emit directly .js files, so that's okay for us. Also, we don't want the TypeScript compiler to run through the node module folder, so this is why we're going to exclude it. Another thing that we have to do is to edit or create a package.json file, which basically says what's the entry point for application, and which in our case is going to be the bundle.js file that is going to be created by Webpack later, and the scripts that we want to run or to have run. In our case, we just have a script named light, which is going to fire up the light server, and a start, which is going to ask the npm command to run the light script. Pretty easy. Okay, so this is our main entry point. It's a TS6 file. Basically, it's the main component. So here we're using the React DOM library to render just a simple HTML component, nothing else. So that's the div with the lorem ipsum inside of it. Also, the second argument to the render method is just a call to the get element by ID, and basically what we're doing here is asking the system to retrieve the DOM element with the ID content and use that to basically embed all the DOM elements that we're going to create using React. In our case, basically, we are going to have an HTML file with a div with an ID content, and when we fire up the application, that element will be replaced by our div with the lorem ipsum, nothing else. So let's talk a little bit about React components. React components are basically the main building blocks of the application. In TypeScript, you will see that components are just subclasses of the React.component class. And, well, components, as you can see, represent the building block of the application. The main idea would be to actually reuse reuse those components in case, for example, you're building something like pagination. So you might have a pagination component that you may reuse over and over in all your archives. Also, components, since they will be rendered as HTML elements, for example, they will create a hierarchy in your application, and this is crucial. Components might receive data from their parents through attributes, and those attributes are called props. Let's talk a little bit about those props. So props will remain unchanged. Okay, in TypeScript, in React, we're going to have two different of model data. One are properties and the other is states. Let's talk a little bit about properties. As I told you before, props will remain unchanged. So that means that what we receive from our parent components is not going to change in the future. So that might be passed from the parent component, or, for example, might be computed from another prop or another state. But what's the state? The state might change over time, and ideally should be treated as a private data. For example, one typical usage of a state should be to represent form fields. For example, so if your component is going to render a registration form, you might receive some properties from your parent component, like, I don't know, the values of a drop-down menu. Okay, so those values are not going to change, but what is going to change is the state. So, for example, the user selection, and the user selection is going to be saved inside the state of the component. Let's talk just a little bit about Webpack. Webpack is a module bundle. That means that you can use it, and it's a library, it's a tool actually, it's not a library, it's a tool that you can use to bundle all these assets that belong to your applications. And by asset we mean JavaScript file, CSS styles, HTML, basically any kind of file that you have in your application might be bundled. In our case, in our demo, we're going to use Webpack to embed the DS6 files that are going to be transpiled actually in just one big single JS file. As you may notice, I took that description from the Angular documentation. Okay, so that's just a quick recap about Webpack. As you can see from the left, you have a bunch of files, JS files, coffee, PNG, images, less, CSS, whatever. You pass them through Webpack. Of course, there's a huge configuration file, and then you have those static assets that are going to be downloaded, a single static asset for each type of file that will be downloaded by your client. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a small demo of what we can achieve using React. Do you have any kind of question? Just type them in the chat. Okay, so I suppose nobody has questions. Okay. Yeah, just let me know if you can see the Visual Studio Code. Okay, great. Okay, so here we have, as I told you before, the ts-config file with this folder, which is going to be our output folder. Then we have the package.json file with just the scripts, and yeah, that's the author, that's me, and the dependencies that we have, so React and React DOM, and the dev dependency. Then, as I told you before, Webpack has a huge configuration file. Here it is. So here, as you can see, there's a bunch of properties. Basically, you can find this configuration files for Webpack just by Googling them. This is pretty standard, so I won't digress about it. Maybe we can do another webinar but just about Webpack, because it's a very, very interesting tool. So let's talk just a little bit about the index.html file. As you can see, this is going to be very easy. Here, we're going to include our dependencies. Here, there's a bundle.js file, which is basically the core of the application, and this is the main content div. Okay, so if you have any questions, just type them in the chat. Yeah, of course we can use a require or some other module loader. Yes, since this was just a very quick and easy demo, I didn't want to overcomplicate the things. But yeah, of course, we can use whatever kind of module loader, or maybe, for example, we can bundle all the dependencies separately from our application bundle and have just two JavaScript files, for example, one with the libraries and another one with the bundle. Are there any other questions? Okay, so I'll move forward. As I told you, this div here is going to be our container for the application. So just let us expand the source folder here, and we have an index.tsx, which is our main entry point. As you can see here, I have one component, hello, which receives two properties, first name and last name. I have imported the hello component from the components folder here, and basically I'm asking React to replace the element main content with the rendered version of the hello component. Let's see the hello component here. As you can see, it's very, very easy. Okay, so we're creating an interface for the properties that we want the hello component to have. As you can see, React uses the generic version of TypeScript. Okay, so here we're using props, hello props, okay, for our hello component. And here I'm not using, I'm just using a generic element, a generic object. That means that basically I don't want to use any kind of state for this component because it's just rendering something, but there's no interaction and nothing else. So I need to have a constructor. I'm sorry, I'm just reading. Okay, how React differs from other JS frameworks like Backbone, Knockout, Angular, okay, so basically, as I told you before, Angular is a framework and React is a library. So being a React library means that you have basically almost all the functionalities of all the other JS frameworks, okay? The syntax is of course different, but they let you achieve basically the same thing. Okay, it's just the way that you want to express yourself. The thing that I like the most about React is the fact that being a library means that the footprint is smaller because you can include, you're allowed to include only the part of the library that you want. So in our case, for example, I'm not using any type of routing mechanism, for example, so I don't have to include the routing. I don't want to use any kind of AJAX calls. I have no backend services running, so I don't need to include any other type of libraries to interact with the server. So, for example, I could have used even jQuery if I wanted to. But jQuery is huge, and I don't want jQuery in my simple project because it's really, really simple. So, yeah, I have included only the dependencies that I really actually need. Okay, so here the component, the hello component, exposes a render method which is going to get called by the React engine, and here we are returning the JS6 that we want to be rendered. Okay, so we are just rendering a simple div. Can I write, I'm reading another question, can I write Angular 2 in AS5 and all this new stuff? Yes, of course you can do Angular 2 in whatever you want. But trust me, Angular, well, if you're familiar with Angular 1, Angular 2 is actually pretty different, even if some of the concepts are similar. But let's stick with React for the moment. But yes, you can do that. So here we are rendering an H1 element with the contents of the props that we have received from the parent component, which in our case is the index.tsx file. So let's build this. In the output here, I can see the output of Webpack, which is using the tsx config file. Okay, what do you prefer if you want to write which application, React.js or React? Okay, well, I love working with AngularJS, and Angular 2 is pretty interesting. One of the difference between React and Angular is the fact that in React you don't have to separate your views. Okay, so in Angular, for example, you have the JS files with the directives, with the controllers, and you have the HTML files that represent the templates for your views. So you have this nice separation, which is okay for some types of projects, but some other types of projects I just want to have control over everything in just one file. So, and also I like the idea to have Intellisense. If we have to include those components, how to do it? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question. What do you mean by include those components? If you want to include them, as I showed you before in the index.tsx file, you have just an import, a very simple import. Here, then your either will find the component and allow you to write the syntax. Automatically, you will have the properties because those are exposed by the hello props interface that we have to. Okay, so we have to include the router, for example, how we have done it. Okay, so yeah, basically you have to import using, for example, npm to install the routing. Then it's just a normal dependencies. So as you can see here, we are importing React and React DOM. And then you will do the same with the routing, or for example, I'm using fetch instead of jQuery to perform any kind of Ajax call. So that's exactly the same. I will just write an import from whatever module I need. It's easy peasy, nothing fancy, nothing special. And then just consume it inside your service, inside your components, whatever it is. Of course, you can do a lot of things in React, like separations of concerns, which is very important. So you don't have to write only components. You have to think of components like your presenters. So components, for example, might receive services injected, and then a component will use the service, which can be mocked. Okay, and in the real service, you can perform all your computations, all your Ajax calls, or whatever you want. Okay, so I have compiled the application, everything. This is the version of Webpack that we're using at the moment, and everything is okay. So I can try to run the application now. So I have fired up a terminal window, and here I'm just writing npm run start. Basically, I'm asking the npm to run package. This script here, just to run a light web server. Okay. So hello React. As you can see here, that's the output of the application. Hello from Davide Guida. And if we want to see the page source inspect, as you can see here, let's expand the body, the main content, basically the container of the application, and here we have the React roots, the h1, and basically this is what is rendered from the React DOM, which is, if you remember, was basically the output of the React component, hello component. Switching back to the component here, and we have the hello, which, if you remember, as you can see here, renders a div with an h1. That's exactly what we have. So let's try to do an experiment. I have created another component because I want a little bit of interaction. Okay, so I have created this hello click component because in this case I just wanted to use a state. So again, we have another interface which exposes our properties. I left just first name, last name as the previous component, and then hello click state, which exposes just a string, a title. Okay. Here I'm setting the current state of the application, creating a new object with a title, and for the moment it's empty. Then in the renderer I have the same h1 element as before, but I am creating a button here, click me, with a callback that points to the onClick. Okay, and here I'm trying to render state.title. Basically what I'm trying to achieve is to have the callback here creating a new title, okay, as a composition of the two properties that I got, first name, last name, and date.getTime. Easy peasy. And then I'm setting this new title as the title property on the state. So now, in order to use this hello-click.tsx thing, we have to go to the index.tsx and we have to modify a little bit here, hello click, okay, and then here we go. As you can see, we have Intellisense. So if I want to name here, we have first name, which is India, and last name. All I have to do is to save, build, okay, and then if we go back to the browser window, we have hello from IndiaMentor. The title, if you remember at the beginning, was set to an empty string. So if we click, we have title IndiaMentor and this huge number here. So if we click again, you can see that the number changed. So this is actually how we achieve interaction with React. It's definitely very, 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 very easy. So just recap, states and properties. Properties are not going to change over the application. We might compute them from other properties, or we might receive them from parent components, while set state are going to change during the application. They represent the internal state of the component, so you may think of them like private members, and they might be used to represent form fields, for example. So this concludes our webinar. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, IndiaMentors, and that's all for me. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat room. Okay, so I suppose that nobody has questions so far, so thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for attending the webinar. Cheers!